This month, we are being joined by Dr. Stuart Nicholls to speak on patient and community engagement. Stuart Nicholls is a scientist in the Methodological and Implementation Program at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute, having previously been the program lead for the Office for Patient Engagement and Research Activities, or OPRA, since September 2020. His research focus is patient engagement in health research, the active collaboration with patients, families, caregivers, or communities in governance, priority setting, developing the research questions, and even performing certain parts of the research itself. In particular, he seeks to understand and/or explain what influences implementation outcomes, e.g., barriers and facilitators to engagement in research, including the use of resources, and improving the evidence base and quality of engagement and evaluating the implementation of patient engagement. As an applied researcher in patient engagement and a member of the Ottawa Methods Center and OPERA, he works with researchers across specialties to support patient engagement in their research, whether it is a systematic review, survey, priority setting exercise, or clinical trial. And I know that Dr. Nicholls is going to be including some video clips of a patient representative named Maureen Smith, and I'm going to read her bio as well. Briefly, Maureen Smith has a long history of collaboration with the healthcare system subsequent to a rare disease diagnosis in childhood, and she has benefited from both participating in pediatric and adult clinical trials and collaborating with research teams, often serving as a liaison between research teams and other patient partners. In 2023, Maureen was appointed adjunct professor at the University of Toronto, Dalla Lana School of Public Health, a recognition of her expertise in patient engagement, and she proudly serves as the first person with lived experience elected to Canada's Drug Agency Board of Directors. And with that, Stuart, I will pass it on to you.
Great. Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. Hopefully you see, do you see the slides in full screen mode?
Perfect.
Excellent. So do let me know if the sound doesn't work for Maureen's video. She would love to have been here, but she's traveling to Spain and Portugal and sunnier climes. So she wanted to sort of ensure that the voice was here, and so she's pre-recorded her parts for the slides she'll be talking to. And as I say, just let me know if there's any challenges with that. So I'm based at the Ottawa Hospital, as you heard, and we respectfully acknowledge that this is located on traditional and unceded Algonquin territory, and that we have the privilege and responsibility to serve First Nations, Métis, and Inuit to demonstrate respect for the contributions, culture, and traditional knowledge of all Indigenous peoples. And this is particularly important when we think about patient or community engagement, where that history, those previous atrocities, can impact trust, can impact how people view research, how relationships need to be built or rebuilt. And so as we think about that relational aspect of patient engagement and community engagement, I think we also have to acknowledge that this comes with a history, and for us to sort of recognize that and address that in the way we move forward.
So thanks for joining us today. My name is Maureen Smith, and I will talk a little bit about I'm a patient partner, and I've had an interesting journey that's brought me here. So I was diagnosed with a rare disease in childhood, and I've done a lot of advocacy work in the rare disease field. And for about the past 10 years, I've really been enjoying working with research teams to bring patient engagement to clinical trial design, and it's just an area that I'm really passionate about, and just happy to be here to talk to you about it and about my experiences.
Yeah, the reason I kept this slide is I just want to show that patient partners are not just their health condition. There's a whole range of experiences lived and learned that the individuals come with, and that we need to incorporate that and recognize that when we're working with our patient or community members. But I won't say anything more about myself. So we hope that by the end of this session, you should be able to understand what patient engagement means in research, be able to propose approaches to patient-oriented research relevant to the clinical trial context and your clinical trial, and have knowledge about some of the resources and supports that you can access to support patient engagement in clinical trials. So very briefly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about terminology before I get into the rest of the presentation, because I'll be using the language around patient engagement, but this can sometimes be taken to mean basically are people involved, actively engaged in their treatment. We're talking about it here in a very different context, about the collaboration with researchers and research teams. You may also see in the literature the language around patient and public involvement, or PPI. That's primarily the language used in Europe and the UK, but you may also see patient and public involvement and engagement. And looking at the literature from Australia and that region of the world, you may also see language around consumer engagement. If you see some of the works by the World Health Organization, you may also see language around good participatory practices. There are some nuances potentially within these terms, but for the purposes of this presentation, if I say patient engagement or patient public involvement, you can assume that they're the same thing.
Okay, so what is the big deal about patient engagement? Well, it's not that complicated. Who do you think is better placed to understand the impacts, the challenges, and the realities of a condition than patients, families, and caregivers? And this is my favorite cartoon, which I somehow managed to fit into every presentation I give. And here you go. Here are wonderful researchers, so proud of their work, and they love it. And this is the perspective of the patients who are the end users of that beautiful mobile. Okay, so let's all get on the same page and talk a bit about patient-partnered research. It's a term that we really like using in Canada. Often patient partners is how we call ourselves. In Europe, you'll often hear also patient research partner. So the CIHR definition really is a patient partner, is a person, is when patients contribute to the research process and research-related activities, different from the traditional, more passive role as research participant, who we formerly used to call the subjects of the research. We also use the terms person with lived experience, so person with lived and living experience, and that includes caregivers, families, and friends. Involved in patient-partnered research is where patients and partners are involved in conducting research activities at all stages of the research process, including supporting grant applications, assisting with participant recruitment, and performing research dissemination activities. All right, so our focus for this presentation is those lovely partners. And of course, we're extremely grateful for all the participants because the research would not happen without them. But we are focusing on those patient partnerships in research, so the partners.
And when we think about patient engagement, it's really sort of come forward more in the last sort of 5 years into a number of sort of guidance and regulatory documents. So the third from the left here is the updated Declaration of Helsinki that was published in 2024. And within that, there's now explicit statements that engagement with potential enrolled participants and their communities should occur before, during, and following medical research. And so this is really about, and it's very much in line with CIHR strategy for patient-oriented research, about ensuring that research addresses the needs, priorities, and values of those who would be participants, but that the research itself takes those perspectives and addresses them in terms of things like potential burden, making sure the outcomes are relevant, and those sorts of things. So now it's embedded in our research principles that underpin our research ethics. The document second from the left is updated and most recent WHO guidance around best practices for clinical trials. Within that, again, there's an explicit statement about the importance of patient and community engagement. And as part of that document and the subsequent action plan, there were also a series of papers published in Lancet Global Health in 2025. And you'll see the paper on the far left, which related to the focus on patient and community engagement. It's also now embedded in the most recent guidance for clinical trials reporting. So SPIRIT, the reporting guideline for protocols, and CONSORT, the reporting guideline for trial publications, now includes explicit statements to report on any patient engagement. So even if there is no patient engagement, it should be stated, but there is an item now to report this. So it's embedded in everything from research ethics all the way through to publication now. I don't have time to go through all the many different ways in which patients or the community can be involved in shaping a clinical trial, but this is a document focused on medicine development, but many of the steps apply to any sort of clinical trial. And it sort of lays out many different opportunities, not saying that every one of these has to have patient involvement or patient engagement, but it gives a sort of idea of how you can incorporate that perspective. So for today, I'm going to pick off a couple of specific ones and talk to those, but there are resources should you wish to look at and consider patient engagement in other steps. So what I thought we'd do is build a sort of hypothetical trial or walk through some of the steps that you would go through when you're designing a trial and think about that and think explicitly about how the patient perspective can be brought in there. So very briefly, you're looking to develop a new transfusion-related trial. We're not going to get into specifics, but you want to make sure that that trial has impact for patients and their families, ensure that the research improves care for them. So in short, you want your trial to be patient-oriented, and that's exactly how CHR defines it. So we're going to think about now how you're going to develop your research question for this trial. So you could sit down and work through your PICO or whatever your favorite structured mnemonic is, but how do you actually know what's important to patients in this case? Well, you could sit down and bring together the different interest holders. You could think through, well, who in this trial area that I'm particularly interested in, who would be relevant there? And there's a couple of frameworks that can help you think through that. This is just one example, what's called the 7Ps framework. So that would be patients, other people like providers, maybe purchasers, payers, those sorts of things. And you could start meeting and have a dialogue to figure out what the research question should be, even if you've already identified a fairly broad area. But a question I want to pose here is, do you need to start from scratch? And I'd like to suggest that that might not be the case. So there are now many hundreds of these activities called priority setting exercises that have taken place. And one of the major drivers of this is the James Lind Alliance, and they have what they call their PSPs or priority setting partnerships. And these are a very structured approach to co-developing a series of prioritized research questions, hopefully and ideally bringing together relevant interest holders, including researchers, other clinical healthcare professionals, and patients and families, to all weigh in on this and be involved in that process of developing those research priorities. And so I just want to flag that there is actually a priority setting partnership that was conducted in 2018 on blood transfusion and blood donation. So you'll see some of these are fairly broad. Again, you would then have scope to potentially bring together those interest holders and work up a very specific research question, but others may be research questions you could take on. And as part of your grant application, you could say, well, this has already been identified as a priority for patients and other interest holders in this space. So again, it may be something you could look at as you're starting to develop your research question to see if there have already been some priorities that you could address. So you've got your research area, you've started to develop that research question, but you want to bring in those patient voices and your patient partners to help shape the clinical trial that you're going to be designing. And the first thing to potentially think about is who are the patient partners you want and how are you going to find them? So again, I don't have time to walk through all these different options, but these are some of the ones that were identified in some qualitative work that we've been doing. But I just want to flag here that when you're building your research team and bringing patient partners into your research team, you really want to avoid them being a single person for various reasons. Firstly, recognizing that one person cannot represent the range of experiences, and so thinking through different perspectives you may want to bring in will be important. Secondly, patient partners often come with health challenges, whether it's for themselves or family members, and at times that might require them to step back from research or other commitments. And so if you've only got one patient partner, you've lost that voice if they have to step back. And then thirdly, it's important for that patient partner not to feel isolated. They may be the only patient voice in the room otherwise, amongst healthcare professionals, professors, other senior leadership, etc. So having more than one patient partner provides a sort of peer support and avoids them being isolated in this role. So I'm just going to talk very briefly to the three examples I've shown in color here as different ways that you could find potential patient partners. Again, this is not exhaustive. And the first option is to go through the healthcare system, and this could be your clinic or another part of the healthcare system. And it can be a quick way to identify individuals with lived experience you're looking for, particularly if that's a narrow area. Obviously, if you want broad lived experience of a particular area, there may be other mechanisms. But it does raise a number of challenges, including this potential to blur the doctor-patient relationship and possible conflict of interest or concerns around potential coercion because of that pre-existing doctor-patient relationship. So one option might be to go through an intermediary, another might be to go through colleagues, for example, or for you to reach out to people that are not in your immediate care. Further, current patients or people who've just maybe been diagnosed might not be in their best place to immediately engage as a partner in research. So again, it's important to think through where these individuals are in their clinical journey, and the paper, just the reference on the right, gives some guidance around that in terms of thinking through where people are in their own journey and what sort of roles may or may not be worth considering them in terms of those roles. Another option, if this is feasible for you, again, recognizing that some healthcare conditions or in terms of blood transfusion, it may be there's no direct patient organization that represents individuals or families. But you may, if there is that option, you may be able to go through them because they may have a list of individuals who have expressed interest in working with research teams. They may also have done training or onboarding for those individuals, and they may also come with prior experience of working with other teams. So it can be a useful route to find individuals. Some have direct engagement with individuals, some post opportunities, sort of like a jobs board, but you should be aware that there may be costs involved, and if it's going through a newsletter or something like that, that may only go out monthly or quarterly. So again, depending on your timelines, it may not be feasible. Either way, you need to be clear about what sort of experience or expertise you're looking for, even if recognizing that this is going to be somewhat negotiated because individuals will have their own needs, interests, but also abilities in terms of how much time they can commit. So there are support tools like this from the Manitoba Sport Support Unit at the University of Manitoba, where they give some ideas of things to put in any sort of advert or to think about when you're looking for patient partners. Another option is to go through formal matching systems that maybe don't exist for a particular condition or aren't organizationally limited. So, for example, your local hospital might have a patient family engagement program or a committee that you could reach out to in terms of identifying individuals who may wish to partner on your research. Again, it very much depends on the specificity of that lived experience or experience that you're looking for, but that can also be a good route. And again, these individuals may have experience of partnering on clinical side or quality improvement, as well as research, and can bring all of that experience with them as well.
And then now you have them, yay, you're ready to go. And so you need to plan on how you're all going to work together. and you've got to consider their needs of your patient partners and help maximize their ability to help you. Years ago, when I first started, the recommendation was write it all out, tell them exactly what you want, and get them to sign on. We don't do that anymore. Now it's really a discussion. So what is it that you're looking for? What is it that they can bring? What are they interested in bringing? It's kind of a negotiation back and forth where their needs are being met, your needs are being met, and you can go back and forth to find a happy medium. And in your patient partners, there could be diversity. Maybe one person has the time to do more than the other. That's fine. We're all different. You have to kind of tailor it to the people who are there, and to always keep in mind what it is that you're also going to be able to sustain and to support when you ask people to engage with you. So you're going to build your engagement strategy with your patient partners. And really, you've got different levels of engagement that you can have in your project, and you can have people with different roles and levels of engagement within the same project. So you may start with 2 patient partners who are really at that collaborate stage with you, or even a lead support stage, and they then help you to get another group together, like an advisory group, or more at the consulting stage. So in one project, you could be looking at different levels of engagement, and so just keep open-minded about that certain pieces or certain areas of your study lend themselves better to this level, whereas another area lends itself better to another level. So you have to kind of work that through. And with your patient partners, the ones who you're collaborating very closely with, they're going to have a lot of ideas about that too. So they're usually a really good source of advice to you and to work with you to figure out how to do that. Okay, and really you should be looking at involve, collaborate, and lead support. Those are really that when we talk about patient engagement, we're really talking about those kind of levels. The first level that's there, inform, is not really patient engagement. It's really just telling people about your research. That's not, or letting them know about it. That's not. We don't consider that patient engagement. So this spectrum has to be adapted when you're really talking about patient partnerships and research, and we really are talking about those last 3 stages. But you can also have the consult stage feed into the other stages. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example based on my own experience, and that's with the Inform Rare Disease Pediatric Network. So this is how we're set up. We have the research team, we have the patient partner co-PI. Guess who that is? That would be me. We have co-investigators. We have 6 patient partners in our group. They are parents who are co-investigators. And then once we got started, we created a parent advisory group. There's 6 of them. And then we created a youth advisory group, a few more people there, and with a person who we call a special youth advisor. It's a little older than 18, but really important to get that person's perspective also. So that's kind of how we're set up, and they work at different levels of engagement, given where we are in the research process, except that the co-PI and the co-investigators are actually can join any committee they want, and they can attend any meeting that they would like to attend. So it's pretty flexible. So you can see there an example of different levels of engagement. Okay, so what do you need to consider? Well, trauma-informed approach is really important. A lot of people are developing resources on that. So they're bringing their lives into this, and that life may include some traumatic events. So empathy is really important. We need you to be flexible. So offer different opportunities or ways to be involved. I was mentioning before, patients may need to step back for periods. So you need to offer options to keep them informed and let them come back in. It's really, really sad when are invested in a project and you devoted your time and then, oops, something happens and you have to step away, and that step away means leave the research team. That's just not right. So the flexibility piece is really important, and you can always update them on what's happening and invite them back in if they're able to do that. Also be transparent about what you can and can't do. So, if there's limits, they might be budgetary, it may be just limits as far as what you can sustain. You need to explain those and explain it to us. Like, we can't do this because, and then when you get feedback, well, tell us how it was used or why it wasn't used. So, that was a great idea, Maureen, but we're just unable to do that because, it might be something with ethics, it might be something with budget. There's a lot of different reasons. It's really important for us to know that, and don't assume. So, ask your patients if they're okay. Do the options work for them? Check that things are clear. Communication is really the key. The other one that's not on there that I'm going to add is one common error is like enthusiasm. So the project kind of ends, and then the researcher's adding another project or another piece to it, or he gets a dissemination grant or something and continues. And you can't assume that your patient partners are going to want to continue with you. So it should always be presented as an option, because when it's presented the other way, it makes us feel like we're actually quitting, and we're not. We committed to a certain thing and we did it, and then there's more. And in many instances, we're just enthusiastic. Yes, let's jump on. And sometimes we're not. But you have to frame it in a way that doesn't, devalue all of the work that we originally did with you. So I've seen that happen a couple of times, and I found that difficult as a patient partner.
So you've got your patient partners now, you've kind of figured out your research question. One of the other pieces to think about is obviously, what's your primary outcome? What are the outcomes you're going to measure? And so, do you go and look what's in your medical record and say, okay, that's something we're already capturing, that's a good outcome? Do you look at other studies, see what they've measured? Do you speak to patient partners or other collaborators? Well, obviously, all of these can be useful and helpful, but I just want to flag another option that maybe also works into this, which is core outcome sets. So these are agreed upon outcomes that people have agreed should be measured in all effectiveness trials in an area. And again, part of the rationale is that it allows for comparison across studies, particularly as we look to synthesize evidence in systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So it can be very helpful there. But it's important then that these reflect important outcomes, not just to one group. And so ideally, these are co-developed, much like the priority setting exercises, with the relevant interest holders in that particular area. And again, we can go broad or more narrow with the particular focus, but it should ideally include patients in that. So there is an organization called the COMET Initiative that maintains a database of existing core outcome sets that have been developed, and there's methodological guidance that's been developed and published, and those are freely available to look up. You can actually search the database to look for any relevant outcomes that may have been developed in your area. And so I did that just for this presentation. There was only really one that really looked relevant to transfusion. This was published a few years back, developed in the US. But as you'll see, no patients were included. It was primarily clinicians in the US who developed this particular outcome. However, there are two recent reviews that have been conducted, systematic reviews that have been conducted, largely in preparation for the development of core outcome sets. Those are shown on the right, and both of those concluded with a call for the development of core outcome sets, including all relevant interest holders, including patients. So it is an area where, again, you may see some development that could be relevant to you or your work, and it may be a place to start, even if you need to add in other outcomes that are relevant to your immediate patient partners or your own particular area. but it may be a place to start those conversations rather than, again, starting from scratch. So you've picked your outcome measures, you've got your patient partners engaged. What are some of the ways that you could work with those patient partners or community partners in terms of the study design itself? So again, not going to go through all of these. There are resources that can give you ideas though. And it is something where there are a few examples in this space, not a huge amount. Again, recognizing that the reporting of patient engagement up until the 2025 update to consort was not a requirement. So we know there's underreporting from some previous studies, but you'll see here with the Emotion trial that there was engagement with patient organizations as in order to try and ensure that this met the needs of the community and the patient community specifically. So again, it is possible to do even in areas that maybe don't have as an immediate obvious link to patients. A couple of resources that may be helpful in terms of trying to think, how do I engage with patients or community members in this process? The one at the top here is something called the Perceived Research Burden Assessment Tool. It's a structured survey which breaks down potential areas of burden for patient participants. So again, trying to think through in advance what the participants in your trial may face. And it breaks it down into logistical burdens, psychological burden, and physical burden. And so it maybe is something you could work with patient partners once you've got a sort of draft protocol or idea of your trial design, and get feedback on that, identifying maybe the areas that might be most burdensome, and then you could work with your patient or community partners to understand more about what the challenge might be with that area and what might be solutions to help address some of that burden. There's also evidence that shows that patient engagement can improve recruitment into clinical trials, particularly where you've engaged with patient or community partners around those recruitment or patient-facing materials. So consent forms, posters, those sorts of things. And there is an indication that may also have an impact on retention as well. So that, again, there's tools there to sort of help think through this process and evidence to suggest this is actually beneficial. So I'm kind of skipping ahead now to sort of the end of the trial. You've got your results and thinking through how you can engage with patients or community members or the public even in terms of mobilizing that knowledge and disseminating findings.
All right. So really, really important that you report patient engagement, and now is required in consort. Why? Well, it's important that we track it. It's important that we learn from people who are doing it so that we can improve it all the time. And it's important to know where it's not happening so that we can also work on those gaps. There's also a tool called GRIP2, which is the guidance for reporting involvement of patients in the public. It's not a very onerous tool. It doesn't take a lot of time to fill out, but it will have about 5 sections where you'll give a little bit more detail about what the patient and your patient partners did in each one of those areas. It's called GRIP2 because it's for studies that the main focus wasn't patient engagement. That's called the GRIP. The GRIP2 is for where there was patient engagement in your study. So it's a really great tool. I highly recommend that you go and look at it. Okay, so you need to work out the why, then the how, and you need to be intentional. So obviously you want to communicate your results, and there are many ways of doing it. So the most traditional one that you all know about are journals. So not all journals support patient partner authors. Many do now. It's improving, and that could be to do with attitudes or policies. Make sure that if you are including a patient partner as a co-author, that you indicate that, if you can, in their affiliation so that we can recognize. When I read an article, I go right away and look and see, oh, let me see, did they have patient partner authors in there? Did they include them? So please try to do that, but never assume that your patient partners want to be co-authors or even first authors. I've had the pleasure of being a first author, it should always be a conversation with them. There's a lot of privacy issues that arise there, and you should have various options. So you could be acknowledging them anonymously or with their name, or they could be, when you're a co-author, your name, your complete name has to go. There are certain things that go along with that. Some people are not comfortable with that. So please make sure that you give options and that they understand the steps. And there is a absolutely great, Equator has a great video about the steps, and which would be absolutely a recommendation to go and show that to your patient partners, and for you to look at it too. It's quite interesting. So you have to make sure they understand what the responsibilities are and what the criteria are, because we should be held to those criteria also. So I just submitted something, I think probably today, and I had to make sure that the co-authors knew that you absolutely need to read this, and hopefully you've got time to give us some feedback and approve of the content before I will put your name down as a co-author. It's really important. So there's other paperwork, there's the ORCID, and there's IDs and conflict of interest. It's yeah, and you absolutely, in many cases, most cases, have to work with your patient partner to help them through that process. It's not easy. The other thing is compensation. So are you offering compensation for all the work that goes into being an author? And of course, communication about the purpose of the paper, who's going to read it, and just making sure that everyone's on the same page with that. So there's your traditional way of disseminating. And of course, there's so many other ways. So co-presenting, here Stuart and I are today modeling that, but you have to be sure that you're explaining the process, that if they're traveling to co-present, are you facilitating registration and travel? Or do you have contingency planning during the co-presentation? Support your partner. Conferences can definitely be bewildering. It's nice to have a friendly face there. Oh, hi, come and meet so-and-so, and that's really very helpful. And then after, you absolutely need to debrief and recognize what they did, and make sure that you're reimbursing all of their expenses. No patient partner should have to pay out of pocket for things like parking or traveling to go and present the research. Okay, and just a little bit about evaluation. It's so important. And what we're trying to do now in the patient engagement field is to move beyond what we would call process evaluation, where you're evaluating your processes. Very important. You want to make sure your processes are sound and that they're working, but we really also want to evaluate the strategy and the impact. And that takes more than surveys, and it takes more than just speaking to patient partners. You really have to speak to everyone who is involved with them to really get the impact, because there should be an impact on all of the members of the team. So hopefully when you're thinking about your project at the beginning, you'll think about the evaluation. Some people add it on as an add-on at the end when you're running out of money and you're running out of steam and you're already on your next project, and you're thinking, oh darn, I didn't do such a great job of evaluation. So try to think of it as an essential component and work from there. All right, this is our closing slide, and what a great message. One size does not fit all. Just as all of you researchers are different and have different interests and talents and skills, so do your patient partners. So try to keep that in mind. Some people have the misconception that we all speak with the same voice. No, we often disagree with each other, and we've got a lot that we can bring, and we're absolutely the biggest cheerleaders for your research, because it can impact our lives in incredible ways. So I hope that this presentation was really helpful to you, and I just want to thank Stuart for modeling patient engagement and co-presenting, and he's gonna sign off.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone. As I say, we try to cover a few of the key steps, but happy to sort of cover anything else in discussion, and any questions if there are other bits that we didn't touch on that would be relevant, particularly for your area. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Stuart, thank you so much. And again, I appreciate you came in sort of last minute on this, and you did such a great job putting together slides, and I really appreciate your adapting it for the transfusion community specifically. Just quickly ask anyone in the audience if they have any questions or comments. And while people are thinking about that, one question that I would have for you and Maureen, and I think one of the challenges I think many researchers have when they're looking to engage patients in trial design and the framing the questions and conducting the research and that sort of thing is that this is fundamentally an academic undertaking. And it's a lot of this the process of running a trial is highly technical. And I think there is a concern, justified or not, that having patients be part of the process will somehow slow you down or will they'll or you will end up sort of intimidating them and they will not want to participate because they find it sort of too technical. What is your response to researchers who have that kind of concern, that it's going to mess up their trial to have too many people around the table?
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand it. And, we often work in timelines that aren't conducive to some things. I think I would come back by saying, well, what's the time implication if you get it wrong? Or what's
Mm.
the time implication if things are not thought through and you have to repeat things? So again, it's a trade-off, right? Do you invest the time now and try and make sure that you don't have to address those issues later on? I don't think, it's a common concern that comes up. But I don't know whether it's completely borne out by the evidence in terms of how long trials take with and without engagement. And again, if we look at there was Kenneth Getz in the US did some work that looked at um, data from the pharmaceutical industry and Tufts data they had about the number of protocol amendments that were required in early
Mhm.
in clinical trials. And certainly, I think they said they had data on phase 3 trials in cancer. And one of the things they sort of modeled was if your patient engagement prevented at least one protocol amendment, it could save months of time and potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars for what is in effect a relatively small investment comparatively. So again, it depends how we sort of weigh those different things, I think. And then in terms of the technical piece, again, we don't need to present everything to a patient partner. Patient partners can, again, as Maureen said, part of that negotiation is where would you like to have input? Where can we work together? And maybe you don't need to know anything about the randomization process, the allocation, all that sort of thing, but really the outcomes. Are we measuring things that are important to you and your family? Does the question actually address something? We're asking people to come in for 6 blood draws in 3 weeks. Is that feasible for you? What are the implications we need to think through there? So I think there's very practical things we can talk about, as well as those, let's say, priorities and values that we can think about right up front.
Okay, appreciate that. Johnny.
I hope that my audio works. I apologize, I was a little late joining, so I hope this question is not something that was already addressed at the start. Thank you both for an excellent talk. I echo Jacob's comments that it was really well put together and nice to have the back and forth and both perspectives. Just in terms of like logistic there, practically speaking, in terms of kind of identifying the right patient and where you go to find those like the patient representatives. Can you speak a little bit to that, like in terms of should you be finding patients that exactly have the type of disease that you're trying to address? I mean, I would think ideally, but there may be some challenges, especially for kind of clinician scientists, where the patients and now you're entering into a little bit of a different sphere from a patient-doctor relationship to now being kind of colleagues in some ways. And so question is like, where do you find your patient representatives? How do you select them, and how do you navigate some of those challenges in shifting relationships?
Yeah, I mean, all great questions. And I think my personal view is that the closer you can get to the lived experience of the people who are going to be in the trial, that's going to be the best because you're going to get the most relevant information working with those patient partners. Now, sometimes that's a challenge. You may not be able to get the specific sort of clinical experience that you're looking for, and maybe you can find other ways to sort of capture some of that. So I know working with Deb Siegel, for example, on a trial, it's cryptogenic stroke with maybe as a precursor to sort of cancer or something like that. Maybe we can't find one person who has all those experiences, so maybe we can work with someone who's had a stroke, someone who's maybe a younger person because that's the same demographic, and then find someone who's had a sort of cancer-related experience because a lot of the intervention might involve sort of things that they would have experience with. So again, there are different ways to sort of parse that out. In terms of finding them, I think there's multiple routes. I only talked about a couple, but obviously through the healthcare system, if you have access to patients, that might be certainly if you've got a narrower lived experience that you're looking for, that can be easier than through patient organizations or other systems where you may not have so fine-grained experience. It might be like you're looking for a particular experience within breast cancer, but if you go through an organization, you may just people with experience of breast cancer more generally. So again, it's a trade-off there. I think the biggest thing I would say, and one of the questions in our sort of consulting work that we do through our method center is often people come to us not really knowing exactly what they're looking for or where they're wanting help from the patient partner. So I think that can actually be a really productive first step. And I gave a resource which was developed by the Manitoba Sport Support Unit, which is some key questions like who is it you're looking for in terms of the general area of health? What sort of areas are you thinking you might want input on? And that can be really helpful because it really drives the sort of process then for saying, okay, if you're really looking for this, maybe this approach is not the best way to find those people. Maybe we go through a different route. One other area that you could think about, particularly if you're consistently working in a clinical area, is previous trial participants. So we've had some people where they've recruited patient partners for a subsequent trial because that individual has got experience of an intervention or a particular clinical area. And if you're proactively thinking about that, you could actually build that into some of maybe you've got a questionnaire or a survey that trial participants fill in. And one of the questions you could have, would you be interested in hearing about future research, for example? And then that's a mechanism by you've got your sort of privacy requirements, you consent to kind of contact them, and you're sort of proactively thinking about that. So there are a number of different ways, as I say, depending on exactly what you're looking for.
Fatima.
Hi, great presentation, Dr. Stuart Nicholls and Maureen Smith. And I have just one question. Sometimes when we involve patients in the research, we do some reimbursement for them, for their participation and for their time for the study. So I was just wondering for patient partner group, do we ever consider this or how we can navigate that issue?
Yeah, again, a great question, one that comes up all the time. So CHR, if you're going through CHR, there is actually a web page called Considerations for Paying Partners. So it's common that we would not only reimburse them for expenses, and again, as Maureen said, no one should be left out of pocket for this work and working with teams, but there is guidance of sort of giving honoraria or compensation in recognition of the time and the commitment and the input that they're having. So there's a number of considerations around that. And as I say, the CHR page has those considerations. So things like it's taxable income, being clear about that this is taxable income. And certainly for some patients, if they're receiving some other sort of income benefit or support, that gets weighted against those other benefits. So it can be really important to have a discussion. Well, it's always important to have a discussion, but it can have consequences. it may vary for some provinces, but in Ontario, if they receive $500 a year or more, it triggers a T4, and that can have institutional implications, like your institution requires their SIN number. People may not be comfortable giving that information out. So there are a number of things to consider. There is no one uniform guidance in terms of amounts or how often or how you pay people. Some people do it through cash, gift cards, or other options. Two institutes in CHR have developed their own internal guidance, so Institute of Genetics and Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, but that's really for their own patient partners. The one I would suggest is the SPORE Evidence Alliance, so Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. They have a publicly available policy, I guess, for how they compensate, and it varies depending on what the activity is, what the implication is. Are they a co-PI on your grant versus someone who's being consulted? And I'm happy to share those resources or links to those after this if you want. But I would always check in with your own institution, because institutions have to take these national research network policies and implement them locally, and there may be nuances there. So I would always check with your finance department if you want to go down that route.
Thank you so much. This is so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo. I think you've provided so many practical resources in your talk. I mean, I think beyond sort of establishing the overall philosophical framework for why we should be doing this, the details about how I think are really important. I hadn't heard of many of these resources that you mentioned. I'll just from my own personal experience, I'm a site PI for a clinical trial looking at an intervention for patients with sickle cell disease at the time of a pain crisis. And I can tell you that the trial protocol had to be amended several times because the patients just did not want to be enrolled while they were having a pain crisis. And it's the kind of thing that patient engagement probably would have helped, avoid really slow enrollment earlier on. But to that question, though, what do you advise for researchers, who are working with industry, for example, or who are part of big multi-center studies, where the protocol is written, it's done, you've been sort of handed it to say, okay, go. What sort of options are available at that point to get patients involved in the process when it's sort of basically handed to you to implement?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a big issue, particularly, again, multi-jurisdictional trials, right? So you may have differences and nuances in each of the jurisdictions. I would say I think there's still often local implementation opportunities. Again, the consent form, if you've got adverts, things like that, being clear on that. Again, sometimes there are sort of site adaptations, or if you're in a pragmatic trial, there might be flexibility within some of those elements. So again, could be an opportunity to have some input there, depending on what the opportunities are. So I think there's that. The other piece just to flag is that now a number of industry groups and companies themselves have people like their chief patient experience officer. So they may also be doing some work internally around this. So it may also be worth checking whether that organization has an internal group that can address, if there's a particular issue, maybe take that up and address it internally, which would then facilitate the sort of global application of maybe some of the solutions.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, I think we are just about out of time here, so we can wrap this up. Again, Stuart and Maureen, thank you so much for coming in and presenting today. It's such a helpful topic, and I think it is still, I think, for many of us, a bit of a black box. But do appreciate it. We will be reconvening on April 16th, where the next topic will be assembling the research team with Floyd and Kuchenbauer. So thanks everyone who was able to join us today, and don't forget to fill out your evaluation.
Thank you.